Hello, everyone. This is Jennifer Fadun, and this is my Project 3, which is about Californian versus Southern accents and dialects. And in this presentation slash video, we are going to go through the history, analysis, and comparison of these accents. So just a little bit of background and a little bit of the inspiration behind this project is, um, well, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, so I am a Californian at heart. And my inspiration was I moved to Texas and just about a year and a half ago, and well, actually, my husband's from Texas, and ever since we started dating and we got married, I had just always been fascinated with accents. And I mean, when I moved to Texas, I was in culture shock. I never really met Southern people before. And, just observing the culture and the dialect and the vocabulary was just so fascinating to me. And that, I just wanted to investigate it more. And, I even wondered to myself, do Californians have an accent? Do I have an accent? So that is a bit of the inspiration behind this project. So just an overview, we're going to first talk about the California accent and dialect. Then we're going to move on to the Southern accent and dialect, and we're going to go through the influences, which includes the history behind each of the regions, and those that history will give us insight into the influences of the language, even before English came. Just the people that were in those regions um, had contact with the settlers, and the people who brought English. So as we've seen in our textbook, that has a large influence, and we'll see that further as we go along. And we'll look into the phonology and the vocabulary as we go along as well. And we shall end with a little bit of a compare and contrast, and also look at some of the stereotypes and associations with each of them at the very end. And there's also going to be some videos and recordings along the way. So if you hear some pauses, it's just because I am adjusting from my headphones to the audio on the videos. So just a little bit of definition from Merriam-Webster. A dialect. Well, these two are similar. A dialect is a regional variety of language distinguished by features of vocabulary, grammar, and punctuation from other regional varieties and constituting together with them a single language. An accent is a way of speaking typical of a particular group of people, and especially of the natives or residents of a region, or an individual's distinctive or characteristic inflection, tone, or choice of words. So now we're going to start with the California accent and dialect. So as you could see, the influences, a lot of you know that America was originally inhabited by Native Americans, and this is also, we'll get into it later, but it's very similar to Texas as well, in that Native Americans were the first ones there. And then we move on to Spanish, and this is just giving a really brief history of these different regions. So you have the Spanish who came, and we just have some people that some conquistadors and you could just see the various times in history that they came and that they were sailing the Pacific coast. And the Spanish also had settlements. And if you've ever been to California, you know that there are a lot of settlements and missions in California, and that Spanish influence is still heavily seen today. And you can also see it in um, place names and all different types of things in California. Um, so Sir Francis Drake, I wanted to mention him as well, because that is kind of the first appearance of English in California, even though he, wasn't there for a long time. He just came and kind of left. So in California and in Texas as well, we know that there's a heavy Mexican population and Mexican influence, obviously, because, distance wise, Mexico is very close to both California and Texas. And this is just kind of the introduction of Mexico. California was ruled by Mexico in the 1800s, and, there was the Mexican War of Independence, and Mexico and Spain, there's conflict there, and Mexico wanted independence from Spain. So that was just kind of a brief history. Oh, and as well, I wanted to mention a few of the the biggest influences on um, modern um, modern Californian, just English especially. Um, so California, when I think of California, I think of not only, the English language, but I think of the diversity and, what brought English, but what brought the different cultures, because California is such a melting pot. I mean, specifically where I came from, Los Angeles, I mean, I grew up with um, more Asians than, Caucasian people. And I grew up with a lot of Middle Eastern people as well. And, that melting pot kind of started with the gold rush, and people that, came from all over the world to come to California and all over the country. And it, also the Transcontinental Railroad as well. And it brought many dialects, accents, ethnicities. Um, and so I just wanted to include those as well, just to show that the California way of life and the accent and the people, are a mixture of people, and that really influenced the language. And lastly, um, one of the biggest influences is the surfing culture. And I really wanted to highlight this because, as you'll see in the videos and also some of the recordings, and a lot of the media and television of today, they show this accent, and I don't know if you're observing my accent as I'm speaking, but the surfing culture in California has a lot to do with the way we speak. And it all started in 1885 when three Hawaiian princes were going to school in San Mateo, California, which is a little bit more northern California. And they visited and went surfing in Santa Cruz, California. And I just put the rest is history because that is where surfing was introduced in the US pretty much, is by these three Hawaiian princes who decided to cut down a bunch of redwoods and go surfing. And And what I found fascinating, which I can deduce just from, hearing the different accents of Hawaii, California, and Australia, is that these three places are known for surfing. And the more I listen to each of them, the more I realize that they sound similar to one another. They're all very relaxed, and they use similar lingo. And I just encourage you guys to listen to these different accents and just really pay attention to the rhythm, the inflections, the intonations, and maybe I'm crazy, but I think they sound pretty similar. So I found a really amazing documentary, and this guy, I'm blanking on his name right now, but I'll mention his name after the video. He goes across the US and investigates, pretty much the different accents and dialects. And he has a specific section about the West and California accents in particular. And it's the California section is an hour long, so I'm not going to make you watch an hour long video. But I am going to show you a clip of this very intelligent professor speaks about certain phonological features in the California accent. And I also wanted to, I'll play the video a little bit longer to have you listen firsthand to a surfer in particular who has a very strong accent. And you'll see later, I have a recording of my brother. And although you can hear, a little bit of that kind of surfer tone, it's not really that strong. So I wanted you to get a little taste of that surfer influence in a heavy way through this documentary as well. So it'll just be a short video, and I'm going to change the volume over to that way.
Many people across the country are familiar with the California dialect from movies like Clueless. It includes some shifts in the sound system. So, for example, one of the things I've studied is ooh fronting. Words that have ooh in them in California English are often pronounced very close to the front of the mouth. So the word do might be pronounced more like do. I do. Oh, very good. That's it. I do. And also words with o, go, go. I'm going to go. Yes, that's also common.
Put those together in some sentences that sound like California.
You're going to go? Oh my God. You like him? You really do? I'm totally surprised. I do too, though.
And is that growing, or is that just a passing thing that we recognized as Valley Girl or whatever it was called 20 years ago?
Oh, no. I can hear these features in radio announcers now, my age or older, on TV. It's definitely, the California dialect is here to stay. It's not just a passing fad.
What are some of your favorite examples of that?
Of California?
Of California,
yeah. I'm all. I think that's a very good one, to be all something as a quotative, introducing quoted speech. So I'm all, I don't think I'm going to go. And he's all, I think you should. And I'm all, why? And he's all, because it'll be fun. And I'm all, I don't think so, etc.
Something occurred to me. Do men speak Valley Girl?
That's such a good question. And it's one I wanted to explore. Men speak surfer dude.
Surfer dude?
Yes.
Dude, that was gnarly. Pete just jacked up so quick, there was no way, man. I got thrown without lip. Couldn't even get to my feet.
Surfer dudes and surfing slang have had a seminal effect on California speech.
Dude, I sunk my inside rail.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that video. Here, let me get back to my PowerPoint. Sorry about that. So I hope you enjoyed that video. The link is right there if you want to access it through ASU. But yeah, I think you should all check out the full video. It's very insightful. And as you could see, you know, Carmen Fott, the professor, she brought up ooh fronting, which before this before this project, I did not realize that I do the ooh fronting. So um, I asked my husband, you know, do I do that? And he was like, yes, you do. So I guess I do do that. Also, something that I noticed was just through listening to Californians speak, the word like um, in a more exaggerated California accent, it has the or the like it's that diphthong kind of the drawing out of those vowels. So instead of, you know, the I, you know, in like, it's like. I don't know if you could hear that clearly. Um, but just little things like that really make up the California accent. I know it's a more exaggerated version in these pronunciations, um, but yeah, I think that even with the most subtle of accents, you can see or hear those pronunciations. So I had my brother, who is from California, and my mother-in-law, who is from Texas, do some recordings for me. And I had one where I had them both recite the Pledge of Allegiance. So you can hear my brother, who's from California, recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and you can hear my mother-in-law, who's from Texas, um, recite the Pledge of Allegiance later. And so you could kind of hear, you know, um, the differences once you listen to them and once you hear my mother-in-law later on. But let's just listen to my brother, and you just keep in mind that he's a Californian, and you know, try to see how much of that Californian slang, or not slang, the phonology can be heard in his Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So my brother, he kind of sped through that, but you could hear, you know, words like his all is a little bit surfer like, and just since he was speaking so fast, you couldn't really hear it as well. But I also had him. Oh, here, let's see. In this slide, I just had him tell me about the plans for his day. So in this one, you can kind of hear a little bit more of the phonology and the vocabulary, which I'll bring up in a second.
wake up, and take a shower, go downstairs, have some cereal. Usually, I have Honey Bunches of Oats, and after that, I make some coffee, um, and go sit down and I read my Bible and I pray. Um, and I do that for about an hour. I like to give myself time before I go out. Time to just kind of relax and time to read. Um, so after I do that, usually I go out, or not go out, but um, right now I'm going to school, so after that I head over to school, and I just I have class. After class, after class I have
So that was a little bit of my brother's day. So I realized that he didn't use so much of the vocabulary. I think I was thinking of another recording he did. But we'll get into the vocabulary. So, so a distinction that you'll see between Southern and Californian dialect is the difference between the second person plural. So as you'll see in the Southern dialect, they say y'all, and I think a large majority of the country, but specifically Californians say you guys. We use like a lot. I hope I haven't said it too much. And then there's some surfer lingo like gnarly, sick. Um, if you're more of like a valley girl, then you'd say like totes or like totally. Um, and some vocabulary that I have tried to use in Texas, but I realize that it is very much Hawaiian or Californian is the term hapa, term for half Asian person, which I am. And people looked at me like they didn't know what I was talking about, so I realized that it was very much regional. Fob is fresh off the boat, so people who are immigrants over here. So like my family, if they have a very strong accent or something like that, they would be fob. And something that I wanted to add in there is that later we're going to talk about the different regions of the South. But in California, there's a really big difference between Northern California, and Southern California in regards to some vocabulary terms like hella or hecka is very Northern California. And you can usually tell if someone is from Northern California by using those terms. Or really random thing, but Southern Californians, we put the word the in front of the freeway we're talking about. So a lot of people from Northern California, they can just, if say you're in San Francisco and they ask you for directions, if you say, take the, and then, the number of the freeway, they'll automatically know you are a Southern Californian. Okay, that's what I was talking about. Also, there are some, regional things. Valley Girl, Surfer Dude. Chicano is a really big thing. So, as I said before, Mexico has a large influence on California, the cuisine, a lot of things. But Chicano, which is a dialect of an accent of Mexican population, or certain parts of the Mexican population of California have a certain accent. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And there are other dialects as well, more smaller. So now moving on to the Southern accent and dialect. So specifically, I mentioned, I kind of wanted to put in here just to make some contrast, because there are a lot of Texas, or not Texas, Southern states. So I wanted to show um, one in particular, the one that I'm living in, Texas, and I also wanted to put in Louisiana because Louisiana has a very, very interesting history. And just a few points I wanted to bring up just about the contrast between a more traditional Southern dialect, such as like a Texas dialect, versus something that is extremely unique in the Louisiana region. So Texas, the influences, very similar to California, Native Americans were there. One of the biggest differences is that Texas was briefly influenced by French. Interestingly enough, yeah, and then Spanish came, and there were missions set up as well. And Mexico is also a very, very heavy influence in Texas. You could see the different parts of history, Mexico gaining independence from Spain, very similar to California in that region. And so Mexico allows U.S. settlers to come. So this is very, very crucial because this is when English is brought to Texas pretty much. And that's when a lot of the influence, of, English comes, and the different, the different cultural influences that come with, that affect the English in that specific area, such as the African influence towards towards English, because the U.S. settlers brought slaves, and that African accent and dialect influenced the English greatly in the South. And that is a huge, huge point to make when trying to analyze the Southern accent. Is you have to keep in mind that this accent is directly linked to an African influence, and you can really hear that in the accent. So the U.S. colonizers gained independence from Mexico as well. So now moving on to Louisiana. So the reason why I brought up Louisiana is because this Louisiana's accent is extremely different from the other Southern accents in that it is extremely, extremely influenced by French. And it can be heard in their language today. Whereas, if you listen to a Texas accent, you're like, can't really hear the French in that. But you go to Louisiana, you could totally hear the French in that. You could totally see the French influence in Louisiana, in the architecture, in the culture. It's there, especially if you go to New Orleans, or New Orleans, as they say. So Native Americans as well there. French came, claimed it. Like I said, still has a heavy influence on the language phonologically. The French brought slavery, and I put Africa again because the Southern accent, like I said before, is heavily influenced by the African accent and the different regions of Africa that those accents came from. Spain. Spain is also a heavy influence. Um, After the 7-Year War, Spain was given Louisiana by France, and then they kind of went back and forth. In the 1800s, France acquires Louisiana from Spain. Sorry about that. That typo. In that treaty of San, I think it's Idelf, Ildefonso. Sorry about that. And then more currently, the U.S. purchases Louisiana Territory. So I wanted to show you this really awesome YouTube video from this lady who does different accents in the South very well. And she actually makes some pretty logical points as to, picking up the speed in these accents or slowing them down, really shows um, the origins of them. So I will let you watch that really quick.
But the primary reason, most people don't realize that the American Southern accent is not a sign of ignorance, but actually the fact that, according to linguists, we're the only people left in the United States who generally still sound like our ancestors. Because if you listen to native born Southern speakers, the average Southerner tends to sound more like this, what we call this Moonlight Magnolia's drawl, because if you speed up that Southern drawl, over time it rapidly becomes a British accent. Most people don't realize that people that came here from Europe were largely from the United Kingdom. So when they got here, this was more along the lines of their speaking tones. But that's the first and second generations coming off the boats, not their children. By the third and fourth generations, the kids don't quite sound like mum and dad anymore because they're starting to develop a slight elongation of the way they talk. What's today called the Virginia Tidewater accent. It's not a complete southern drawl because that's a port area. But as you go farther into the southern interior and the years progress, the accent tends to get thicker, deeper, richer. By Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia, heck yeah, you got a full blown southern drawl. But people don't realize that in most cases in Louisiana, many of the native speakers don't sound like that. They tend to sound like this, I guarantee, especially around the bayous. So you speed up that South Louisiana Cajun Creole accent, over time it becomes en français, French, with of course certain exceptions in New Orleans, which tend to sound like more like New Yorkers because of the Irish and the Sicilian Italian influence. So they tend to sound a bit more like this. And people tend to get a little confused because they think, what, you're from New York? Nah, I'm from New Orleans. Why? So you have to realize that at the end of the day, Southern speakers, like I said, we're not ignorant as it's often been assumed, but we simply sound like the ancestors that came here so many years ago.
Sorry, just 1 second. Just having a little technical difficulty. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that video. I thought she did a great job, like I said, of displaying those accents. And as you heard the Louisiana accent and in New Orleans, you could definitely hear the French influence there. So, um, just a few quotes about how the African language is one of the most influential languages on the Southern accent and just the South in general. Um, Contact with African languages is in much of the South was not only the deepest and most persistent influence of all, in fact, it was as responsible as any other formative factor for the developing distinctiveness of Southern speech. And Africans who were brought to the South profoundly affected the pronunciation of Southern whites, influencing or contributing many features now characteristic of many types of Southern accent. The Southern drawl, the stretching of vowels, the lack of R in words like father, farther. Sorry, I was trying to do the lack of R. The simplification of the final consonant clusters, um, and the deletion of L. So these are just a couple of regions, which so you have the coastal, you have the interior, and you have the delta. Now, I want you to hear my mother-in-law recite the Pledge of Allegiance now, and her accent is definitely a little more thick than my brother's when it comes to the regional accent, so I'll have you take a listen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, as you can see, my mother-in-law has quite a thick accent, and it's beautiful. And you could definitely hear those southern features, and I believe I have another recording, but let's see. Oh, first I wanted to show you a quote about draw, because a lot of people, they think they know what it means, but I just wanted to clarify what it means. To linguists, the term draw refers to the lengthening and raising of accent and vowels, which is normally accompanied by a change in the pitch of the voice. It involves adding a second vowel, and I'm not going to say that curse word, or even a third vowel pronouncing. Oh, sorry. But the drawing out of vowels doesn't necessarily result in a slower overall rate of speech, which is what most people on the street mean by draw. So there are a lot of characteristics that make up the Southern accent and dialect, and I'll kind of breeze through them. So there's a difference between vowel selection in the South and in the general American area. There is often a difference, however. Oh, sorry, there's little difference in that previous sentence, sorry. Often a difference, however, in the placement and therefore in the quality of the vowels. There's a difference there. So I actually think that's pretty true because obviously we have the same vowels, but it's all about the placement and how we use them in the Southern accent. So you have water, and then in the Southern accent, it's pronounced water or water. So that A is pronounced like the short O pronounced as A. So instead of got, it's hat or got. The R dropping is the R dropping and pronouncing of O as a. So in horse. So, oh wait, let me make sure I'm saying that right. Horse. So you see how I dropped the R there. And I apologize if my Southern accent isn't quite on point, but I'm trying my best. So the silent R is a really big characteristic of the Southern accent, like I previously just said. So I noticed in my mother-in-law, one of the first things I noticed about her accent is that silent R in the word father. And I just always wondered why she never pronounced the R, but I realized, through this research that many Southern people do. So father. The R is replaced by, let's see, Fia is replaced by the So it would, instead of fear, it would be fear. Fia. Sorry, trying to say it right. And the is omitted in door. So do or yaw. Yo. Wait. So I'm sorry if I'm not saying this 100% correctly, but I'm trying my best. So the oo becomes a u. So in two it'd be two. And then this is another, in the word 10, it's pronounced as 10. So um, also, a lot of people realize that the ing, sorry, I think I got it backwards in the PowerPoint. Instead of fixing, it's fixin', so that ing turns into the just n. And then there's T dropping, instead of next, best, T, soft, um, uh, for soft, sorry, it would be next, best, first, soft. So you see how I wasn't pronouncing the T. And so there's also D dropping. So in land, it would be lan. And then in, as we've seen in the book, there's some, in other, in Middle English and just like, different transitions from one era to the next, there's often, the TH becoming a T or a D. So it would be, something like, instead of that, it would be dat or something like that. So now we're going to listen to my mother-in-law tell us about her day, and you can kind of see and hear, or just hear the vocabulary and the continuation of the phonology.
Y'all, I don't know how much more I can take of this weather. It's been cold and rainy for what seems like an eternity. I'm fixing to move to Hawaii where it doesn't get cold. It's just been miserable lately with all these cold, rainy days. I'm just ready for the sun to come out and warm things up. Come on, spring, I'm ready for you.
Right, as you heard, that was my mother-in-law once again, and she was telling us about her day, and you heard the word y'all used, and I'm sure you could hear some of that, some of those phonological features that we were talking about. As far as vocabulary, y'all, that's second person plural compared to you guys in the California. And a couple of these, are just what I've heard over the years through dating my now husband and just being around his family and being around the culture in the South. I had to learn these like a new vocabulary. So fixin' to, I'd never heard that before in my life. I learned that that's called, or that pretty much means I'm planning on doing something. So I'm fixin' to go to the mall. I reckon pretty much means I think. Ain't is used instead of isn't. So he ain't going, whereas I would say, he isn't going. Howdy is a greeting. Hunky dory means great. Dern tootin', that means you are so right. And you probably one of the first things you'll hear when coming to the South is bless your heart. That just means I don't even know what it means. People just use it all the time as a term of endearment, I'll say. So lastly, I just wanted to talk about, obviously we can see the differences in, the phonology and just the differences are more striking than the similarities. And so that's why I kind of wanted to highlight the similarities between the Southern and California accents. So a really big um, kind of bridging factor, just, a factor that these two can relate to, or that these accents can kind of share, is that there are negative stereotypes or stereotyping in both of these accents. The thicker the accent you have, whether you be a really a really thick Valley Girl accent, like oh my gosh, or if it's a really thick Southern accent, like I went down to the store, people are going to associate that with a lower, intelligence just because, the thicker the accent, they think the less intelligent you are, which is totally not true. But people have those stereotypes. And those, are given, are influenced by movies, by media, the California accent, that kind of stereotype came from the movie Clueless. And then just the Southern stereotype, that's through movies as well, Waterboy, whatever, what have you. Um, these two accents share a, a very, a very similar phonological feature. And you normally don't think about the California accent being drawn out, but it is. Um, you think of the word, like, and we say like, I don't know, stuff like that. Or like dude, we draw out our vowels as well. Most people just think, Southern, like y'all, they think that it's drawn out. And so they share that similar phonological feature. Lastly, they share similar historical um, roots as well. The Native Americans, the Spanish, obviously, the British and, the European settlers that came over as well. But yeah, and here's my works cited. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I'm sorry if there was any technological mishaps, but I hope it went pretty smooth. And I hope you learned something today. Um, and yeah, feel free to look up these articles and these books and everything. They're really awesome.